The Kootenai River Valley, near Bonners Ferry, Idaho, is a great place to raise cattle and crops because the climate is cool and moist. Average rainfall is 22 inches per year.
That is this brand right here.
Local rancher Merle Olsen, who also serves on the Idaho State Brand Board, doesn't worry about running out of water. Flooding is a much bigger concern.
In this whole Kootenai Valley, we have about 35,000 acres of cropland. And there's 15 different districts, and these districts were diked back in the 40s. And as they were being diked, they were given a number. And this one here is District 3.
Each water district has large horsepower pumps that draw water out of the fields and sends it to the river. None of the fields need to be irrigated.
And the whole valley is sub-irrigated, sub-moistured water coming up from down below. Some of it's seepage from the river, some of it is springs coming out of the ground off the high mountains. And so all the districts the water has to be pumped off. If the river's low enough, it'll gravity flow into the river, but when the river's high, then we have to pump the water off. It's a little bit different in the southern Idaho where you guys have to put the water on, but we pump the water off. If you don't, you're underwater.
The Olsen Ranch, or Rimo Cattle Company, raises crops and grazes cattle in 3 different water districts.
There's 900 acres in this piece of ground here. We have canola, winter wheat, and then at this end right here, we've developed into a pasture program with a rotational grazing. This is small acreage, but it'll hold a lot of cattle through the summer months.
For Olsen's son-in-law, Ryan Mai, who grew up in Filer near Twin Falls, ranching in North Idaho is a stark contrast from where he grew up.
Sort of like 2 different worlds between here and there. Just is irrigated cropland down there, you know, sugar beets, corn, beans, whatever, all kinds of row crops, versus up here it's all dry land, grain and oilseed production and beef cattle, but it's some of the most fertile soil in the Northwest. You know, there's not very many places where you can have dry land, cropland, and get 3 cuttings of alfalfa and 100, 110 bushel wheat, and without having to pump water onto it or to irrigate, but we get it all from Mother Nature.
The Olsen Ranch is located close to the Kootenai National Wildlife Refuge, so it's not surprising to see a lot of wildlife in the fields.
It's not uncommon to see deer and elk and moose and bear and just about anything you can think of.
Another common visitor are Canada geese. Olsen has developed a watering system for his cattle in grazing pastures near his ranch that also provide grazing areas for the geese.
The cows drink out of 3 stock tanks. They're all on a float, so we can keep the water from overflowing. And now, as you can see along this edge here, they keep the grass down, but they don't go into the ditch. They just don't. In the springtime, we have about pretty close to 2,000 geese that come in, and they'll eat on this short grass along the edge of these banks in here.
Olsen's watering system keeps the cattle from damaging the ditch banks, but he avoided the cost of having to put up a fence.
And I always maintain that if you put a fence up and it's tall dead grass, it's a dead zone. Nobody can use it.
The geese like the ditch area while raising their young.
They can just dive off into it if predators show up, and so they hang around here till some of the goslings have developed and can fly away.
The Olsens have 2 brands for their ranch. The 3-Bar M brand came with the ranch when they bought it, and their current brand is a T-hanging heart. Olsen knows a lot about brands because he's served on the state brand board for nearly 10 years. He's one of the 2 members of the 5-member board that represents cow-calf producers. Branding livestock dates back to the turn of the century. It's the best way to prove ownership, and there are more than 18,000 registered cattle brands in Idaho.
In the state of Idaho and across the West, that's the main stave for identification, owner identification of the cattle. Unbranded cattle are pretty hard to find out who the owner is. They can't talk. If you got a brand, it's pretty easy.
The Office of the Idaho Brand Inspector is a law enforcement agency, a branch of the Idaho State Police. Stealing cattle is still a common occurrence.
Whenever you have good cattle prices, you're going to have more theft. More people are out there trying to make a fast buck.
Olsen says it's harder to catch cattle thieves than it once was.
Cattle can move so much faster now, so much quicker. Trucks can be loaded and be gone and be halfway across the country in 24 hours. We've got 5th-wheel trailers that can be in a pasture and loaded up and gone and nothing flat.
Some cases even involved organized crime. In a case in Hawaii County several years ago, people were stealing calves from a dairy to pay for illegal drugs. A woman who was the mastermind in the scheme served 5 years in the state penitentiary. To make the bust, the Idaho Brand Inspector's office went undercover and put some unbranded Holstein calves in the dairy.
They figured it was an inside job. The calves were chipped so they could be traced. Sure enough, they were able to catch the guys just because of that.
Other issues include random people shooting cows.
These guys, I'm sure, are doing it just maliciously. They're not doing it for the meat because they just leave the cattle.
The bottom line is that cattle ranchers should brand their animals for proof of ownership.
For their own protection and for the public at large.
Besides Olsen's service on the brand board and on the Idaho Cattle Association board, he is moving towards retirement and handing over management of the ranch to his daughter Maureen and her husband Ryan. The couple really enjoys ranching in the Kootenai River Valley.
I needed my education in case I had to go pursue other careers. And I even thought about being a vet, but I knew I wanted to work on cattle and horses, and finally my professor said, "Do you want to work on your animals or somebody else's?" And I said, "Well, I want to work on mine." I always wanted to come back.
I saw the chance to live in a place like this and still farm and ranch, and it's almost like you're camping every day living here in this valley between two mountain ranges. And there's all kinds of recreation opportunities and lots of lakes and streams and fishing and hunting and just a lot of things to do.